The PDF name is HChanukah Touching Pegimon.
Everybody, so we're making more copies, so everybody will have. I'm going to ask HaRav to begin. We'll get the screen sharing done in a moment. Can I have what's here? What do you hear? So let me just tell screen share if you can 1 second. Roy Parkov, if you can hear me, the email with the Marmakaimus was sent to you. If you can take care of it.
You saw the PDF from Shlomi.
Doesn't help me.
Oh, I see. I didn't realize. Okay, I can email it to him directly.
Fine.
We'll begin with a familiar Sugyas HaGemara. On the top right-hand side of the Maram Koimus, the familiar Braisa in Shabbos and Afchafal from Beis. Tonu Rabbanon, Mitzvahs ner Chanukah ner ish ubeisai. The Iker Chiyuv of Mitzvahs ner Chanukah is that the Balabayis should be madlik one ner for the bayis, and with that the entire bayis is yotze the Chiyuv of Hadlakah neris. If you look down in the piece of Rambam copied bottom left of page 1 of the Maram Koimus, the Rambam says, Kama neris hu madlik b'Chanukah, mitzvosa shia kol bayis ubayis madlik ner echad. The ikar mitzvah is that every bayis should be madlik one ner, bein shahoyu anshe abayis mirubin, bein shaloy hoya boy ela odom echad. In that there is no machloikis harishonim. That's basic. The basic statement of the Braisa that the Iker Oifen of the Chiyuv of Mitzvahs ner Chanukah is Sheyeh Kol Bayis Ubayis Madlik Ner Echad Bein Shahoyu Anshe Bayis Merubin Bein Shaloy Boy Elo Echad. The Gemara then continues, and the Gemara says V'hamehadrin Ner Lekol Echad Ve'echad. And those that want to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah in the form of a Mahadrin, on Madlik, the Balabayis is Madlik, a Ner for each one of the Bnei Habayis. There, if we look in the continuation of that same Lashon Rambam, bottom left, V'amahader es ha-mitzvah, someone who comes to Mekayim the mitzvah in a Hiddur form, Madlik Neiros Keminyan Anshe Habayis, Ner Lekol Echad Ve'echad Bein Anoshim Bein Noshim. Someone who comes to be Mekayim the mitzvah in the form of Hiddur, the Balabayis is Madlik Neiros Keminyan Anshe Habayis. So that's the darga of the mitzvah of be Mekayim the mitzvah B'Hiddur. The Gemara then says, V'amahadrin mina mahadrin, we have a machloikes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai oimer mi rishon madlik shmoyno mikan va'elach poiches v'hoilech, uBeis Hillel oimer mi rishon madlik achas mikan va'elach moisef v'hoilech. Now, before we discuss the familiar machloikes between Tosfos and the Rambam, how to understand mahadrin mina mahadrin, we first have to point out something that, according to all the Rishonim, is mafurish in the Gemara. And that is that the difference between mahadrin min ha-mahadrin and mahadrin is in a fundamental point. Let's explain. We said that the Iker Chiyuv of Ner Chanukah is Ner Ishu Beisai, like the Rambam says, Mitzvah Shir Kol Bayis Ubayis Madlik Ner Echad. Now, when mahadrin added that one is madlik and ner lekol echad mi anshe habayis, why is that mahadrin? that there should be a ner lit by the balabayis for each one of the bnei habayis. So the Achronim explain, because this, that all the bnei habayis are yotze with one ner, is a chiddush. Essentially, the mitzvah should be that every person should be madlik in ner. Why is it different than any mitzvah d'Rabbanan, that every person is mechuyev b'fnei atzmai? Elamai, Chachamim were masakin chayvas ner HChanukah in the form that all the bnei habayis are yotze as one with the ner of the balabayis. Therefore, when the balabayis is madlik a ner lekol echad ve'echad, the reason why we understand that structure of Hiddur is because we are returning ner HChanukah to be a chiyuv on each one of the bnei habayis. Just that the balabayis is then being madlik a ner on behalf of each one of the bnei habayis. But mahadrin means that each one of the bnei habayis has their own hadlakah, which is performed by the balabayis on their behalf. And that is, and this is not Harinian, but that's the basis of the minhag brought in the Ramah, that mahadrin incorporates that each one of their bnei habayis should be madlik his own ner. Dahainu, in the Shitas HaRambam and the Pashtus of the Rishonim, in mahadrin, each one of them bnei habayis is mekayim the mitzvah b'fnei atzmoi, but the way in which he's mekayim it is by the balabayis being mekayim it on his behalf. And the minhag of the Ramah is that each one of the bnei habayis is madlik. So that form of mahadrin is merely saying that ner HChanukah should be similar to any other mitzvah d'Rabbanan, where every person is mekayim it b'fnei atzmoi. Dahainu, the basic chiyuv of ner ishu beisoi is that everyone is yotze with one hadlakah for the bayis. Mahadrin is each person has his own hadlakah performed by the balabayis, and according to the Ramah, by each one of the bnei habayis. Mahadrin mina mahadrin is being mechadish something entirely different. Mahadrin mina mahadrin is being mechadish that the mitzvah changes on each day. Because Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, who argue if it should be 8, 7, 6, or 1, 2, 3, are only arguing how the mitzvah should change every day. But that's a given that both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that the mitzvah does change every single day. Where does that mahadrin mina mahadrin come from? Bishloima, from the basic chiyuv to mahadrin, we understand the reason why it's a Hiddur is because in place of all the bnei habayis being yotze through one ner, each of the bnei habayis have their own hadlakah, either performed by the balabayis or performed themselves. So we understand that mahadrin reverted ner HChanukah to like any other mitzvah d'Rabbanan, in which every yochid is mechuyev. But the Gemara in mahadrin mina mahadrin is being mechadish an entirely different form of Hiddur. And that is that each yoim should have its own unique way of being mekayim the mitzvah. Where did that come from? The machloikis of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is only how the mitzvah should be performed differently every single day. But kulei alma moedi, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that mahadrin and mahadrin says the mitzvah of ner HChanukah changes in the way it's performed day by day. Mechatese. This question is asked by the Pnei Yeshua. Let's read the Gemara a little further. The Gemara says, what's the basis of the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel? If it should be poiches b'hoylech 876 or moise b'hoylech 123. So the Gemara says, Omar ula pligi botreya meiroi. Chad Omar taime de Beis Shammai keneged yomim hanichnosim, v'taime de Beis Hillel keneged yomim hayotzim. Beis Shammai say that we should change the nace day by day, based on how many days of Chanukah are yet to still be kept. So the first day is 8 that day, the next day there are only 7 days remaining, the next day only 6, and so on. Or according to Beis Hillel, kineged yomim hayotzim, how many days have already passed? V'chad omar taimeh de Beis Shammai kineged parei hachag. Beis Shammai compare it to the number of musafim on Sukkot that decrease day by day, and Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say malim b'kodesh ve'ein meridim. So the Gemara says, Omar Rabba Bar Chana Omar Rabbi Yochanan Shnei Skeinim Hoyu B'Tzidon. There were 2 Skeinim in Tzidon. Echad Osaka Beis Shammai, namely 876, Poiches V'Hoylech. Ve'echad Osaka Divrei Beis Hillel. Ze noisin tam ledvarav keneged parei hachag, veze noisin tam ledvarav the malim b'kodesh ve'ein ma'ridin. So Zog the Pnei Yeshua, don't make the mistake of saying that Yomim HaNichnosim or Yomim HaYotzim or Malim B'Kodesh or Parei HaChag is itself the reason why the number has to change every day. Because it's not true. Keneged Yom HaNichnosim or Keneged Yom HaYotzim means that we already know that the number of Neiros has to change, and the only question is by how much. But Yom HaNichnosim, Yom HaNosim is not the reason why it has to change. And he says, I'll prove it to you. Because in the second Lashon of the Gemara of Parei HaChag, is Parei HaChag a reason why Ner Chanukah should change day by day? What has Parei HaChag have to do with Ner Chanukah? Parei HaChag is Gzeh HaKosuv for the Musafim of the Yontiv of Sukkot, and the change day by day of Chanukah is a Shaila of a Takana D'Rabbanan. What does one have to do with the other? Al Korchok Zot the Pnei Yeshua, the Gemara already knows somehow that the mitzvah is going to change every day. And the only question then is, since the mitzvah is going to change day by day, should that be correlated to the Yom HaNichnosim, or should it be correlated to the Yom HaYotzim? Should it be correlated to the concept of Malim B'Kodesh, or should it be correlated to the concept of Parei HaChag, Mismatim Ha'olchim? But where do we know the basic premise that the mitzvah should change? How do we know this? If you look immediately below the Gemara, the Pnei Yeshua has copied a paragraph of Pnei Yeshua. Zot the Pnei Yeshua l'chayra ein elu hatamim maspikim. All the reasons that the Gemara gives are only sufficient le'inyan ipoiches v'hoylech odif. If you should change by decreasing, or we should change by increasing. After akati beikra dover tzarich tam. But the basic premise of the Gemara is not explained. Lo mochilku chachamim ben aprokim. Why did the chachamim make a difference in each day of Chanukah, and they didn't equate. I light, either you should light each night one ner, or light each night 8. So the Pnei Yeshua says, the explanation of the Gemara seems to be the Vade Kenu Me'ikar Takana. Avada, the Ikar Takana is that it should be the same every night. Just Mahadrim and a Mahadrim was Mechadish, says the Pnei Yeshua. Elotaima de Mahadrim, the Kivan de Shebechol Yoim, Nisrabe Pirsum Hanisa, Vechibas Hamokim Beyoiser, Lochein Ro'i Lasis Hiddur Mitzvah, Lefi Erech HaPirsum Bahachiba. Zod the Pnei Yeshua, each day, the Nes became more and more of a wonder. It wasn't just one day, it was 2 days, it was 3 days. So that says that Pnei Yeshua was Marabe Pirsum Hanes. It was also Marabe Chiba. It showed how much the Rebbeinu Shalom was Mechabev Yisrael, that he extended Kibiyachol the Nes day by day. And therefore, Zok the Pnei Yeshua, Kol Oiz Mishum Hochi Roi Laharbo is Beneiros Kifi Mispar Oisam Hayom. Since the Tachlis of Ner Chanukah is to be Mefars in the Nes, and the Pirsum Hanes was enhanced day by day, and the Chibas Hanes was enhanced day by day, therefore Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin is to demonstrate how the Nes intensified day by day. And therefore, Mishum Hochi Roi Laharbes Beneiros, Kifi Mispar Oisan Hayom. So we know that we should vary the mispar, we should signify the difference in the day. Now comes the Machlokes in the Gemara. How do we signify that difference? Increasing, decreasing, Malim B'Kodesh, Parei HaChag. Now, what we'll try and show is how this svara of the Pnei Yeshua has a source in the Rishonim, and we'll see how the Rishonim already seem to answer this question, and then after we see the Mahalach of the Rishonim, we'll come back to relate this to the Pnei Yeshua. So the Pnei Yeshua has pointed out that the Chiddush of Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin over Mahadrin is to signify the difference in the Yomim. Why does one have to signify the difference in the Yomim? The purpose of Ner Chanukah is Pirsumei Nisa. Since the Nes was more nisparsim Laila by Laila and showed additional chiba, therefore that now becomes the format of Hadlakah Ner Chanukah. So that's the first ha'ara on the sugya, where Chachamim Bechlal saw the Makara to vary the Nes day by day. Either it should be one Ner throughout or Shmoina Neres throughout. Now we'll ask a second shayla. We're familiar with the machlokes between the Rambam and Tosfos, how to understand Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin. We said that the Hiddur of Mahadrin and Mahadrin is that each day the Hadlakah has to vary from the day before. And we have a Machlokes Tanoim, is it increasing in number or decreasing in number? Machlokes B'Sham B'Zil, with two reasons given in the Gemara. Tosfos holds that Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin means that whereas, like we said, the stage of Mahadrin is that the Balabayis is Madlik Neiros Kemispar B'nei Habayis. So whereas the basic mitzvah is one ner for the B'nei Habayis, if for example there are 5 B'nei Habayis, the Balabayis is Madlik 5 neros each night. Zok Tosfos, Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin means that it reverts back to the Balabayis only lighting one Hadlakah, and not one for each one of the B'nei Habayis, but he's Madlik an increasing number of neros night by night. We paskin like Basil, we paskin Moisef Oilach. So the Balabayis is then Madlik 1 on Laila Rishon, 2 on Leil Sheni, 3 on Leil Shlishi, and so on. Zok Tosfos why? Why can't the Balabayis just compound the Mahadrin? Namely, if there are 5 B'nei Habayis, the Balabayis is Madlik 5 neros on each night. Let him light 5 neros on the first night, 10 neros on the next, 15 on the next, and so on. So Tosfos says, if you go back to the top of page 1 of the Maram HaKomis, upper right corner is copied the Lashon of Tosfos. Tosfos says the reason why we don't do that, he says, 3 lines from the end of Tosfos. If we remain with the Mahadrin, that we light a ner for each person in the bayis, even if each night he'll add 5 on the first night, 10 on the second, 15 on the next, etc. Zok Tosfos leke hekera. It won't be discernible, it won't be obvious which night of Chanukah it is. Why? Because the numbers of the neros that are being lit are not the number, don't correspond to the number of the day. On day 1, he'll light 5, on day 2, 10, on day 3, 15. So no one is going to make a cheshbon to say, or we can't necessarily assume that we'll make a cheshbon to say, well, there are 5 B'nei Habayis, we can see that from night 1. So if we divide each night by 5, we'll come back to the number of the night that it is. Divide 10 by 5 when we get night 2, divide 15 by 5 when we get night 3. So that's not obvious from seeing the neros. What will people say? They're 15 B'nei Habayis, they're 10 B'nei Habayis, they're 20 B'nei Habayis. So we'll take it in a moment. Dahainu, and this is the important point. What Tosfos has been mechadish, and what was pointed out, is that Tosfos understands that not just has Mahadrim and Mahadrin said that, like the Pnei Yeshua pointed out, that the format of being Mekayim the mitzvah varies night by night, but the format has to vary such that the number of the night is also obvious in the pirsum of the mitzvah. It doesn't say that in the Gemara. The Pnei Yeshua says that in terms of reading the Gemara, the most we can say is, Zot the Pnei Yeshua, that the way in which the mitzvah is done has to change each night, like the Pnei Yeshua said, to signify the additional pirsum and the chibas hanes. But how it has to change, it doesn't say. Either it goes up in number or down in number. We see in Tosfos that even though if we would add each night to feed the number of people in the house, the total number of neros would change night by night. Like in our example, it would be 5, 10, 15, 20. So it would be changing night by night in number. So Tosfos, that's not enough. The pirsum hanes has to signify the number of the days. We're familiar with the Shittas Rambam, that the Rambam says not like that. The Rambam says the same way as Mahadrin supplements the basic mitzvah of Ner Rishu Beisai, so too Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin supplements Mahadrin. So if Mahadrin is 5 neros per night in our example, Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin according to the Rambam is 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. The Shittas Rambam is well understood. The Gemara never says that we have to demonstrate which night, which day of Chanukah we're holding in. All it says is that the number of neros has to either increase or decrease, depending on Beisham or Beisil. But that the Hadlakah has to contain in it an indication of which night we're holding, doesn't say that in the Gemara. So therefore, the Rambam says 5, 10, 15, etc. And Tosfos is mechadish. No, if we'll do that, there won't be a heker. It won't be obvious which mispar yoim we're holding by, and therefore mahadrin mina mahadrin doesn't supplement mahadrin, but it's a new form of being mekayim the mitzvah. Dainu, that the indication of the number of yomim is the greatest hiddur possible in Ner Chanukah, as I state in Tosfos. And therefore, the obvious question is where did Tosfos see that in the Gemara? Where does it say in the Gemara that the Hadlakah itself has to indicate the number of days? So if we look in the top left, we'll see that there's a Bir Hagra in Shulchan Aruch, where the Bir Hagra, B'soich Dvarov, addresses this question. And the Bir Hagra says like this. I apologize that the copy is slightly small, but it's going on the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch brings the shita of the Tosfos, and the Ramah brings the shita of the Rambam. So Zok the Bir Hagra. The Iker shita the Mechaber is, like we said, which is shita Tosfos, that Mahadrin min Mahadrin is 1 menorah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not Kimisbar b'nei Abayis. Zok the Goin Tosfos. That's the shita of Tosfos. Deloi koi a Mahadrin, because Mahadrin min Mahadrin is not adding to Mahadrin, but it's its own form of being mekayim the mitzvah. Di'im because if one just adds each night according to the number of the Abayis, Zok the Bir Hagra, loy have heker. Then there's no obvious way of discerning which night of Chanukah, which day of Chanukah we're holding. And the Rambam himself concedes that the minig is like Tosfos. The Bnei Svarad, the Rambam says, we're noyeg like Tosfos. Now, the next gra is the gra that we want Be'ikah to be oimed on. The Yesh Oimrim. The Yesh Oimrim is the shita of the Ramah, which is the Rambam before the minig. Namely, like we said, that Mahadrin mina Mahadrin adds to Mahadrin, so that each night it's 5, 10, 15, 20. Zok the Goin. Kach chasav Rambam lahalocha. Nire. Where did the Rambam get that from? Shekein hudas harif. This is the opinion of the Rif. Why? The Rif is copied on the bottom right of the page. The Rif is a pella. Let's see the lashon of the Rif, and we'll see the kasha that the Goin has. We saw that the Gemara brings a machlokes beisham and beisil, increasing or decreasing. Moisev v'hailech, poiches v'hailech. The Gemara brought 2 reasons: yomim hanichnosim or yomim hayotzim. Do we signify the number of days remaining or the number of days yet to come, or malim bakodesh or parei achad? So the Rif brings the machlokes. Then the Rif brings the Gemara's ma'aseh. Omer Rabba bar Chana. Shnei skenim hoyu b'tzidon. And the Gemara brings a ma'aseh that there were 2 skenim in Tzidon. One was noig like Beishamai, one was noig like Beisil. And the Gemara says this said because parei achag, and the other one said because of malim bakodesh ve'emer yidim. Now the Rif is a halacha sefer. The Rif is a halacha sefer. How do we paskin? Avad do we paskin like Beis Hill? No shaila. Beis Machoik is Beis Hill and Beis Shammai Machoik is like Beis Hill. Now, so what's the relevance of this story with the Shtei Skenim Shahayu B'Tzidan? Why is it relevant? We need to know that there was a Zokin who was noig like Beis Shammai. That Zokin was noig Shaloi Kadin. He was noig like Beis Shammai. We know Avada the Psaki is Beis Hill. So why is the Rif bringing the mice of the Shtei Skenim to say what? Zok de Gra al Korchoch, it's to say that the reason why Beis Hillel hold that you have to be that we're moisef v'hoilech is because of malim bakodesh ve'in meridim, and the reason why Beis Shammai holds is keneged parei achag. So we see that in the 2 reasons the Gemara gives of yomim hanichnosim or yomim hayotzim, or parei achag u'malim bakodesh, there must be a nafgemina in those 2 reasons. Otherwise, we understand it's just different reasons. Keneged yom hanichnosim, keneged yom hayotzim, parei achag, malim bakodesh. These are just all svaras. If the Rif brought the ma'aseh b'tzidon, and one zokin said parei achag, and the other zokin said malim bakodesh, it must be that time of malim bakodesh and Beis Hillel has an nafgemina. Zok the Goin, what's the nafgemina? The nafgemina is, let's now go back to the Goin, top left. Zok the Goin near shekein das harif. Mi dehevi meimer de Rabba bar Chana om Rabbi Yochanan shnei skenim keneged parei achag, or the malim bakodesh. Zok the goin de lahai taima loy chayshinon lehekera diyom hanichnosim oy hayotzim shekosav atoisvis sham. Zok the goin a dover nifla. He says, what's in afkimina in yom hanichnosim or yom hayotzim or parei achag or malim bakodesh? Zok the goin azay. Malim bakodesh means you just have to go up. Parei achag means you go down. Is there any issue of the number of the days? Nothing. The only way in which the mitzvah has to change day by day is either increasing or decreasing. The number is not relevant. But Zok the Goyin, Yomim HaNichnosim or Yomim HaYotzim is a number. Memela, the first time of the Gemara, by saying that we have to indicate Yom HaNichnosim or Yom HaYotzim, in that time of the Gemara lies this additional Hiddush that we have to signify the number of days. Yom HaNichnosim means the number of days yet to come, or the number of days remaining. Zok the Goyin, in the first time of the Gemara, we see that we have to indicate a number. In the second time of the Gemara, of Malim or Parei Achag, it's only a question of up and down. Memela, we now have from the Goyin that the reason why the Rif brought the time of Malim Bakodesh and Parei Achag is to indicate that the number of Yomim is never part of the Chiyuv of Pirsum Anes. Zok the Goyin, Oy Bazoi, the Machloikis between Tosis and the Rambam is which time of the Gemara do we follow? If we follow Yom HaNichnosim and Yomim HaYotzim, then we have to indicate a number of days. If the time is only Malim Bakodesh or Parei Achag, it's a question of up and down. Memela is the going, since the Rif brought the Maisel, the Zkanim of Tzidoin, we see that the Heker of Yom is not relevant. The Rambam Kedarkoi followed the Derech of the Rif. Masha'in King Tosfos is the going. Tosfos held that either, and the going we'll see in a moment how the going understood more in detail, either that we pass on like the first Lashon of the Gemara, in which case we have to indicate a number of Yomim, or that's not the Machloikis between the two Lashonos. All the Lashonos agree to the basic premise that you have to indicate the number of days. The only question is up or down. Let's sphereize the Lashon of the Gra briefly. This is not just the Chiddush that we see from the Rif. The Gemara is mashma like that. Why? Because the Lashon of the Gemara is Chad Omar. When the Gemara brings the original time, Omar Ulu ba pligi ba treya meiroi. Chad Omar. Pligi ba and Chad Omar v'Chad Omar is not the correct Lashon the Gemara should be using if there's no nafkamina lahalacha. It should be Zenos and Tam Ledvarav, Zenos and Tam Ledvarav. The Lashon says the going of Mar Omar or Pligi ba Chad Omar v'Chad Omar is mashma. There's an nafkamina ladina between them. Mashma v'chulei de nafkamina b'chai gavna kanal. Umaskono, the base skenim command Omar Malim Bakodesh. The maskon of the Gemara is that we follow the time of Malim Bakodesh. Therefore, there's no reason to indicate Mispar Hayom. So what we've gained from the Gra is not just an understanding and the basis of the Machlokes between Tosfos and the Rambam, but we've also gained a makor for how Tosfos knew that it has to be in the indication of the Mispar Hayomim. How do we know that? We know that from Keneged Yom HaNichnosim or Keneged Yom HaYotzim. Now, on that, the Stipler in Siman Yud Zayin asks a very basic shaila, and he says the Gra is still not enough to explain where Tosfos knew the makar for this din. Why? Because he says we find so many places in Shas the lashon of keneged. Tfilos keneged tmidim tiknu. Does that mean that tefillah is a carbon? It means it corresponds to karbanos. So he says when the Gemara uses the lashon keneged yom ha'nechnosim or keneged yom ha'yotzim, does that mean that we have to actually indicate a number? It doesn't mean that. It means if you want to know should the variation from day to day be increasing or decreasing, so we have either keneged yom ha'nechnosim or keneged yom ha'yotzim. The Gemara never says mafurish that you have to indicate the number of the day. It says keneged. Keneged just means corresponding to. Vu state in them, Zok the Stipler, what the Goin sees in the Gemara, that keneged yom ha'nechnosim or keneged yom ha'yotzim is mechayev, that the number of neir should exactly correspond to the number of the day. It's keneged. If I want to see it, it's just nifla, mosik midrash, It's not copied on the Maram Komis, but in that simon, the Steipler brings about 10 places in Shas where the Loshen Keneged is used, and it doesn't obviously mean a one-to-one correspondence. It means the Inyan here is similar to the Inyan there. Zok the going, for example, Zok the Steipler. I'll show you Minebe in the Gemara like that. The Pnei Yeshua's Kasha. Keneged Parei HaChag. Is there any connection between Parei HaChag and Chanukah Be'etzem? Parei HaChag start from 14 and 13 b'chulei. It's Musafim. It's Deiraisa. Doesn't seem to be any shaykhs. Of course, in the Sfarim, there's a lot of connections in the Teichen, in the Pneumius of the Indian, why Parei HaChag is the dogma. But what it means is Keneged Parei HaChag. We see a place where the Torah, day by day, decreases the Kiyam Mitzvah. So it was like Keneged that, we decrease the Mitzvah of the Neiris. Vush state in the Gemara that there's a chiyuv that the Pirsum HaNeis itself, like the Pnei Yeshua says, has to contain an indication of the Mitzvah HaYomim. Where does it mvura like that in the Gemara? That's what the Steipler asks in Siman Yud Zayin, copied on the left-hand side of the page. So perhaps to explain this, we'll expand the Yesod that's mvura in the Pnei Yeshua, and we'll base it on a Tosfos in Masechta Tainis. The Tosfos in Masechta Tainis is copied immediately below the Bir Hagra. There are a number of chidushim in this Tosfos, and we'll try and point them out as we learn through Tosfos b'siyata d'shmaya. We are familiar with the Gemara in Masechta Erchin. That the Gemara in Masechta Erchin says that there are 18 days in which Halal Sholem is said. We know that's the first day of Pesach, going in order of the Regalim, the first day, one day Pesach, one day Shavuos, and then going through the progress through the Shana, and then we have the Shmoini Yomim of Sukkot, and the 8 days of Chanukah. So one of Pesach, one of Shavuos, 8 of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres is 10, and the Shmoini Yomim of Chanukah. The Gemara says that on Rosh Chodesh and on the rest of the days of Pesach, as we know, we say Chatzi Halal. We say in the Lashon of the Gemara, we say Halal B'dilug. So Tosfos comes to explain why on Chanukah do we say Halal Shalom each day. The reason why we are able to say Halal Shalom on each day of Sukkot and not Halal Shalom on each day of Pesach, as we'll see, Tosfos quotes the Gemara in Erchin that on Sukkot the number of the Musafim changes every day. That's what the Gemara says in Erchin. Mashenkin on Pesach, the number of Musafim is constant. Therefore, what? So Tosfos explains the following. Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach hu goymer halal. Only on the first day of Pesach we say Halal Shalom. Aval Shmoyne Yemei Pesach loy. On the rest of the days of Pesach, Shmoyne means in Chutz La'aretz, the rest of the day of Pesach we don't. Mishum deloy domi lechanukah v'sukkos. It's not the same as Chanukah and Sukkos. Why? The Chanukah dinohu ligmor hahalal the kolaches. It's in dinohu. It's svara to finish halal each one of the days. Why? The chol haches yomim hoyo hanes misgadel. Because each one of the days of Chanukah, the nes became greater and greater. And therefore, Zok Tosfos, v'hoya kol echad v'hoya kol echad v'chad yom tov. We're going to come back to this Lashon Nifla of Tosfos in a moment. V'chein b'sukkos, kol yoyma v'yoyma have a yom tov la'atzmai. L'fisha parei hachag mismatim v'holchim, aval Pesach eina mishtana loymi karbonis v'loymi yom tov, l'chein ein goyim b'yahal elo yom rishon. Now, to explain the Chiddush in Tosfos, we'll preface Tosfos with a Yesod that's Mavur in the Turi Even. I'll say it just outside, just because of time constraints. The Ikka Turi Even is copied on the second page of the Maram HaKomis, the second paragraph on the second page. Mitoich the Sugya in Megillah Daf Yudala, the Turi Even establishes that there are two reasons why we got chayiv to say Halal Midivrei Sofrim. One is that Yom Tov itself is Mechayiv Halal. Every Yom Tov is Mechayiv Halal. Yom Tov. Pesach is Mechayiv Halal. Shavuos is Mechayiv Halal. Sukkot is Mechayiv Halal. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur would have been Mechayiv Halal, says the Gemara in Erchin, but Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Mesim of Psuchim Levanov. Then there's another Halal, Zok the Turi Even, which is a Halal that said Al Hanes. Halal that said Al Hanes. The Turi Even has a nidin if the Halal that we say Leil Pesach is a Halal that we say for the Nes of Yitzias Mitzrayim. It's two Mechayivim. Now, Bepashtos, if we would have asked Misvara Chitzayna, what is the reason why we say Halal on Chanukah on each day? What's the Mechayiv? It's difficult to say Yom Tov Because the Gemara says Mefurish in Masechta Shabbos that they were never Masakin Chanukah as a Yom Tov. Issa Malacha they never created. Kipshuta Chanukah doesn't have a din of a Yom Tov D'Rabbanan. Yimei Mishta, the Rambam says, it's Yom in which we're Madlik Neiris. But Yom Tov shouldn't be a reason to be Masakin Halal. Pashtus, the Halal should be a Halal Alanes. So if we would ask why we therefore say Halal every day of Chanukah, we would have answered simply because every day was an ace. The fact that the Shemin was Deilik on Yom Aleph, however we answer the Besesus Kasha or Yom Beis, didn't say that it would be Deilik again on Yom Gimel. So each day is its own ace. So each day had a Halal. That's what we would say for Pashtus. Now let's be ma'ayin carefully in the Lashon HaTosis. Tosis does not say that. Tosis in Tainis says, of course the Nes was Mizgadol every day, but because the Nes was Mizgadol, every day is considered its own Yom Tov. Let's see the Lashon HaTosis again. Davar nifla that's mavur mitech this Lashon HaTosis. The Chanukah dino hu ligmar halal the kol aches yomim hoya nes misgadol. Each day the nes became greater. Now, if Tosis would stop there, we would have said every day is its own nes. Why did Tosis have to add that the nes was misgadel? Why not just say that every day was its own nes? Mavur and Tosis, that outs the nes, a nes that repeats itself again and again. We would have then understood in hindsight wasn't a nes every day, it was a nes for 8 days. And therefore we would make one Hallel for the nes of Shmoyne Yomim. That's Mavur and Tosis. That's if Tosis would have stopped there. And we'll see the Levush, Be'ez Hashem will say this Mefurish. But Tosis doesn't say that. Tosis goes on to say, and therefore B'hoyo kol chad v'chad Yom Tov. Chidush Pella and Tosis. The reason why we're saying Hallel on Chanukah every day is because Hallel is a Yom Tov. It is. Even though it's not Osir B'asiyas Melocha, every Yom of Chanukah is Mechai B'Hal B'fnei Atzmoi because it's a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmoi. Zok Tosis, where do I get this idea? How do I have a right to say that every day of a whole Yom Tov is a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmoi? Zok Tosis, have a Gemara Mefureshes. Pesach, every day is its own, Sukkot, every day is its own Musaf. Therefore, we say Halal Shalom every day. Why? It's one Yom Tov. Zok Tosis, the changing korban tells me that every day of Sukkot is considered a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmoi. Therefore, says Tosis, I see a Yisoid, I can have one long Yom Tov, and lange Yom Tov and Sukkot, Shivas Yom Tochoigu, but every day is a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmoi. How do I know that? Because the korban changed. What Tosis has now given us is Poshup Pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara says, why Pesach not and Sukkot yes? Because Pesach the korban doesn't change and Sukkot it doesn't. But Tosis says, so what? We're talking about a Chiyuv Hal because of Yom Tov. Pesach is one Yom Tov, Sukkot is one Yom Tov. What's the difference? So Tosis made a mistake. The din of Yom Tov is by Sukkot that every Yom is like a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmoi. What's the proof to that? Because the korban changes. Zok Toisves, I see the same thing on Chanukah, that every Yom you say Halal Sholem, because every Yom is its own Yom Tov. What makes every Yom its own Yom Tov? It's Shmoyne Yomim. Not the Neir. Let's be careful with the Neiris. The Lashon HaTosis is before, let's be very accurate. Excellent. The Nes was Mizgadel. The Nes was Mizgadel. It's not one and again and again and again. It's that each additional Yom changed the entire Nes. The Nes was Mizgadel. Ordinarily, we would understand if the Pach Shemen lit once, the Nes just repeated itself. Zok says no. The Nes Yom by Yom meant that the Nes was Mizgadol. It's a different Nes when it was Deilik 2 days in a row, a different Nes when it was Deilik 3, and V'chein Halo. Memela Tosis Mechadish a Hiddur Nifla, that the Yisoid of the Chiyuv of Halal is a Chiyuv of Yom Tov. It's not Osir B'asiyas Melocha. Yom Tov like Kivlu Alayu. Just as a Maramokim, if one is ma'ayin hatev in the Lashon of the Rambam, in the beginning of Hilchas Chanukah, it's Dvar Mufurashim in the Rambam, that there were Masakin Yemei Halal. There were Masakin Halal out Yom Tov. The Bnei Soschar and Chidushim Maratzah is medayik like this in the Rambam. There were Masakin Yom. Yes, correct. But he describes it as Yomim. And he says, Dumya than Yom HaPurim. And the Bnei Soschar is medayik this in Chidushim Maratzah. On the Sugin Chanukah, Dvarim Niflon. That's a Maramokim. But it's a Tosis. Tosis doesn't want to say that the reason why we should say Halal every day Hashem is because there was Nes every day that didn't necessarily come machmas the yom she'ovar. So he says it's a yontif dikadin. What indicates it is because the nes was misgal. Now, we'll add a dover mosaik from the Sefer Birchas Yitzchak from Rabbi Yamin Pala. Where did Tosfos know? What was the hechrach? That the Halal and Chanukah is because of yontif. Why didn't Tosfos say the obvious? That the reason why there should be Halal every day is because every day there was a new nes. The fact that it was daylik yesterday doesn't mean it was going to be daylik the next day. It's copied on top of page 2 of the Maram HaKomis, top right. He says that he brings a kasha from a kadmoin, from the Sefer Bati Kahuna. The Rav in Izmir. Right? Sefer on Chuvas Bati Kahuna, and he has also Hagois on the Re'aim, which is Rabbi Eli Mizrahi, who himself wrote a parish of the smag on the mitzvah of Hadlakah Ner Chanukah. The smag, at the end of his sefer, isn't just moina taryag mitzvahs. He's also moina sheva mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, kiminyan keser. One of those sheva mitzvahs d'Rabbanan is Hadlakah Ner Chanukah. On the smag, the Re'aim wrote a parish, and many achronim after him are noisim and noisim bidvarav. One of the achronim who wrote, I'll say that the Re'aim is the Baal Batikun, is the Batikuna. The Batikuna asks a sheila nifla. Why do we not say Hallel on Purim? So the Gemara in Megillah brings two reasons. The Gemara then discusses Akati Abde Achashverosh Anan. We were still not Nigal Lagamre. One reason the Gemara brings is because of Kriosa Zui Helula, which is how the Rambam paskins. The Mikra Megillah itself is the Hilul for the Nes. As I state in the Gemara, and as I state in the Rambam. And in fact, there is a Meiri which the Bir Halacha brings down in Hilchas Megillah, that if one isn't able to be koirei the Megillah, one then becomes mechuyev in saying Hal. As I state in Meiri, and the Bir Halacha brings it. Chiddush Nifla. Pri'asa Zui Hilula. The act of Mikra Megillah is the act of Hal. It's Mekayim Takonas Hal. Now, Frek the Bate Kahuna, so why do we say Halal and Chanukah? Hadlakah should be Hilula. What's the difference in Mikra Megillah and Hadlakah Ner Chanukah? Let the Hadlakah itself be a Maisa Hilul. Now, Lule, the Bate Kahuna, we would have said that Megillah is a Kriya. The Rambanam, in Hasagas the Sefer HaMitzvah says that there isn't a set format how to be Mekayim Mitzvah's Hilul. Chachomim said we should say Prokim of Tehillim, but we really could have said other things. So the Gemara says if one's Koreh the Megillah, there lies a Halal. Hadlakas Haner should be b'makom kriyas Halal. How is a Hadlakah b'makom a kriya? That's what we would have said, perhaps api pshuto to be miyasha the batikuna. But Rabbi Yamin Pala says a teretz nifla. He says like this. He says, we said before from the Turi Even that there are two reasons why we might say Halal. We could say Halal on an ace, or we could say Halal al Yom Tov. Purim, the Halal is a Halal al Nes. That's mefurish in the Gemara. We don't say Halal Nes shebechutz laaretz akati abdei chashverish anan. So if we want to describe the Nes, then we understand that a description of the Nes is the Halal, because the whole reason why we're saying Halal is only because we have to be Mahalal for the Nes. So something that describes the Nes, or something that indicates Pirsum HaNes, the Gemara says Kriyas HaMegillah is Pirsum Nisa, that can fulfill the chiyuv of Halal al HaNes. But in Chanukah, the Rambam is Meduyek, and Rabbi Yamin Pala makes the same diuk as Friedrich Achronim, that the Rambam is Mavur that the Halal is a Halal of Yom Tif. It's a Halal of Yomim. Ner Chanukah, which is Pirsum Nes, cannot be Mekayim a Halal, which has to come because of Yom Tif. The only time we can say Kriosa Zui Helila is because Vibal Mikra Megillah is Pirsum HaNes, it contains a Nes. It can act as a Halal where the Mechayev of the Halal is Nes. But where the Mechayev of Halal is the Yoim, a Maisa Hadlakah, which is Pirsum HaNes, can't be the Halal of a Yoim. That's gufa from the fact that we don't say that the Hadlakas Haner should be Hilul. We see it's Choluk b'Yisoidai, the Chiyuv that would have been by Purim than by Chanukah. By Chanukah it's Yomim, Tiknu Shmoinas Yomim of Halav Hiddur. There's a takana of a yomim of Hallel. Masha'inkin by Purim, it's only a takana to be maskir the nes. And therefore, Kriyos Zui Helila does not apply in the case of Chanukah. So we see a Chiddush Nifla on Taisus, Mevur, that in the case of Chanukah, the Hallel is a Hallel of Yomim. And we still see that Taisus says that were it not that each day the nes was Mizgadel, Chanukah would be the same as Pesach, and we would only say Hallel once. That's the Yom Tov. From Ashmalom, the nes is Mizgadel. The obvious question on Taisus is how does Taisus know that? Where does it say that the nes is Mizgadel? B'chol yom, who state? Kipshute, the Pnei Yeshua asked on the Gemara, it should either be 1 ner each day or eight neris each day. Where is it that the nes was Mizgadel? Seemingly, the nes just repeated itself day by day. And that we see from the Lashon of Taisus, that's not enough to be Mechayev Hallel, because that doesn't make every day a Yontif by itself. We need that the nes was Mizgadel. And again, just to emphasize the Chiddush, ordinarily we understand it was just a repetitive nes, where it means either the same nes happened 8 times, or it means 1 nes happened for 8 days. But it's 1 nes. But Taisus doesn't say that. Taisus says, since the Hallel is a Hallel of Yontif, we have to say that day 2 is fundamentally different than day 1. It's Yontif. Why? Because the nes was Mizgadel. How does Taisus know that? So I heard from Rafal Shar Shlita that the beer for this Taisus is in the Levush. The Levush in Siman Tov Reish Pei Gimel, it's copied on the left-hand side of page 1, just below the Taisus in Tainis, and we'll see the Lashon inside. B'ktzara. Shteit in Levush Hazoi. Shteit in Levush, v'goyimrim Hallel b'chol yom. One finishes Hallel each day on Chanukah. Why? It's like all the days of Sukkot, right? And this is based on the Taisus. Taisus compares Chanukah to Sukkot. Shemipnei chol yoim choluk b'karbonoisav, because on Sukkot each day the carbon is different. Goyim Hallel b'chol yoim. Chanukah nami choluk b'chol yoim b'nei roisav. Taisus. We have a Gemara that says that the Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin is that each day, like the Pnei Yeshua says, the difference in the day has to be indicated in the Mispar HaNeiros. Zok Toisves, the difference in Neiros comes from the fact that every day is a different Metzias of Nes. Sha'Nes hoyim misgadel b'chol yom. Oy bazoi, Zok the Levush, where did Tosfos know that every day is a different yom? Tosfos knew it from the change in the Mispar HaNeiros. Now let's go back to the Pnei Yeshua. The Pnei Yeshua said, I'll take this question in just one moment. The Pnei Yeshua said, where do we find the mitzvah d'Rabbanon shalei hishvu midei seim? Either each day 1 or each day 8. The answer, Zok Tosfos, is in Tainis, because the day 2 is a different metzias than day 1. We understand that Chanukah is a yontif of Shmoyne Yomim. It's not the Chanukah, it's not the yontif of Shmoyne Yomim. It's a Chanukah of there's 1 yom. And the next day, the nes was misgadol to become a different yontif, Zok Tosfos. Oy bazoi, a different yontif is mechayiv, a different ma'aseh. A different yom of Sukkot is mechayiv, a different mispar of Purim. A different yom is mechayiv, a different mispar of Neiros. It's nifla. What? What does misgadol mean? What does misgadol mean? So we'll define it in just a moment. What the concept of misgadol means. But just so far, we're zoicha to a hagdara from Taisus that we don't ordinarily assume. The nes misgadol means it wasn't that a shvius of the Pach Hashemen or whichever teretz of the Beseisif we assume just repeated itself again and again, or the same nes happened over 8 days. Einoi doime yom rishon of Chanukah to yom sheni of Chanukah to yom shlishi of Chanukah. It's not doime. Memele, the Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin means that difference between the nes of Yom Rishon to the nes of Yom Sheni has to have its expression in the Neiros. Oy bazoi, that's the Pesach to the Pnei Yeshua. Now, Agav Rabbi say, we are marviach with this Tosfos in Tainis, a dover nifla moed. The Pnei Yeshua asked, Porei HaChag to Chanukah? So we said that up here, the Pnimius of the Inyanim of how do we understand it? It's Poshet. Keneged Porei HaChag means because the Yontiv, the nes was Mizgadol B'chol Yom, that makes it a Yontiv B'fnei Atzmoi, Rabbi say. When we have every day being a yontiv b'fnei atzmai, so we have to show a difference in the kiyum mitzvah of each yontiv in that way. Are we memayit v'haylech or are we moisef v'haylech? The mashal is Zaktesis in Tainis. The mashal is Parei Chag. We see that from the dinim of Hallel. It's masik midvash. Divrei chachamim v'chidoisam. Nifla. Hare the whole musig that Chazal established that on Chanukah every yom is mechayev Hallel. What steht in Taisis in Tainis? Steht in Taisis in Tainis. Be'etzem Chanukah should have Hallel Shalom one day. Why doesn't it? Because kol yom the nesu is mizgadol, and therefore kol yom is a yontiv b'fnei atzmai. What's the dogma to that Zaktesis? Parei Chag. The dogma of a yontif, which is one Shem yontif, where every yontif is a yontif b'fnei atzmai, is Parei Chag. Now you have a shayla: should you be memayit v'hoylech or peiches v'hoylech? Parei Chag is a mashal. It's the zach alein. It's not keneged. It's a dogma. Nifla. Parei Chag. In other words, of course, in the Teichen Advarim, we know in the Inyonim of Adad Mechuber in Kama v'Kama v'Chinas, but the Etzem mashal is a mashal in din. In Parei Chag, we have a dogma of Shivas Yomim of Sukkos, where every yom is a yontif b'fnei atzmai. What?
Why is sickness every day?
That Taisus doesn't tell us. Maybe we can be omer on that. Taisus doesn't tell us. But Taisus is just proving that if each yom has a halal shalom b'fnei atzmai, and the halal is as yontif, it must be that each yom is a yontif b'fnei atzmai. As I state in Taisus.
You want to say every day was a different that. What's sickness different?
Taisus doesn't tell us. We maybe if you have time, we can touch on it. This doesn't tell us, but what we have is the etzem din that every yom is yontif v'aseh. Dosh taken Taisus. I'm sorry. Keneged umasoylam shiu peichsim v'hoylchem. Yeah. Keneged peichsim. Yeah. Keneged parayam shev peichsim v'hoylchem. About the timing, but this is the metzia and Taisus in Tainus, Rabbi say. Now, if we want to see how this is meduktuk, this chiddush that we're trying to extract from Taisus. Let's see how the levush continues, Rabbi said. The levush continues and he says, "V'oid shebechol yom v'yom nischadesh haneis v'nitoisef v'roi ligmor alav esahalo." The levush then says the reason that we thought Taisus should say that each yom the nace changed, so the new nace is mechayev halal. But what's the first reason of the levush? Not because of the nace, because it's doimet to Parei Chag that each yom is a yontif b'fnei atzmai. So we have mefurish in the levush these two mahalchim, and like I heard from Rafal Sharshli, to the first mahalach levush is the bir and Taisus. Now, so far we have a makar now to what the Pnei Yeshua said. The Pnei Yeshua said that because the nace is the Lashon the Pnei Yeshua says, "B'kolaylo nitoisef hayom haya nace yoiser," and the chavivos and the pirsim was yoiser. The makar for that Pnei Yeshua is a Taisus. Shebechol yom hoya nes misgadol. But whereas the Pnei Yeshua says that that's mechayev because a nes was misgadol, that's directly mechayev a variation in the mispar of the neres. From Taisus we have an additional understanding of the oimek of that because each yom is a yom tov b'fnei atzmai. It's not that Chazal just said because the nes was misgadol in the Taisus, so add neres. It's a different mechayev. The Yom Sheni of Chanukah is a different chefza than the Yom Shlishi of Chanukah. It's a different chefza than the Yom Revi of Chanukah. It's a different day. That's what says in Taisus in Tainus. And a different day is Mechayev, a new mitzvah. That's the oimek that we have from Taisus in Tainus as the basis for this chiddush of the Pnei Yeshua. So Mimele, we then understand that the basic assumption of the Gemara that one has to indicate the change in the Yomim day by day, which the Pnei Yeshua says, where did Chazal get that from? The answer is because that's the Iker Mahus Hayoim. The Iker Mahus Hayoim, that the Nes was Mizgadol B'chol Yom V'Yom, defines why Yom Sheni is a different day, a different Yom than Yom Shlishi. And each day is Mechayev its own Kiyum. Now, Avada, that's only Mahadran Mina Mahadran, because Iker Adin, like the Rambam says, we were only Mechayev one Ner for each Yom. But Mahadran Mina Mahadran is not just a Hiddur and being Moisef Neiros. It's a Hiddur to indicate that today, this Yom is a different Yom than yesterday, because the Nes was Mizgadol B'chol Yom. That's the answer to the Pnei Yeshua Shaila. Now, let's see if we can then approach Be'ez Hashem, the Shaila of the stipler. How we for time of Shlomo should we be married?
A few moments.
We will recall that the stipler asked that even in the first lashon of the Gemara, Keneged Yom and Chasam Keneged Yom, it doesn't say you have to actually indicate which day it is. You only have to indicate either an increasing number of days or a decreasing number of days. Now here Rabbi said we can suggest the svara. Maybe we can suggest the svara. Tosfos said that if the royim don't see the number of yomim, we're missing the mahadrim in a mahadrim. The Rambam held no, 5, 10, 15, 20 makes no difference. The Goyim told us because Tosfos had a Gemara that one has to indicate the number of yomim. Nachnosim yom yotzim. In fact, the stipule, it's keneged. It doesn't have to. It's not. Doesn't mean it has to be equivalent. It has to correspond. Let's understand. If the reason itself why the number of neiros varies day by day is because the nes was misgadol b'chol yom. Nes was misgadol b'chol yom. Now, there's two aspects in the nes being misgadol b'chol yom. That means the nes repeated itself. But part of the nes misgadol b'chol yom also is the number of times that the nes repeated itself. Let's understand. If each Tosfos Tainis tells us that each yom of Chanukah is a different yontif. So now, if the nes repeated itself 6 times on day 6, that's Machai 1 yontif. When it repeats itself until 8 times, it's a different yontif. Kum dechois, we don't just need to be able to express and indicate the nisgadol hanes. It's not just enough to appreciate that it went on for longer. We need to indicate how many times the nes repeated itself, because each additional time that the nes occurred again is a different metzias of nes. The nes was misgadol. Einoi doime, day 2 to day 3 to day 5 to day 7. Kum dechoisa, if the mispar of the nes would just change day by day, so we would just indicate that the nes continued, we wouldn't yet have indicated to what extent the nes was misgadol. Because the Gidul HaNes changed day by day. Adding 1 day changed the entire Nes. So Zok says, if we don't see in the ribuy of the Neiros the number of the day that we're holding in, we are still lacking in the extent of the Gidul HaNes. HaRav, what did Tosfos say? Even if we see that the Nes repeated itself 8 times or went on for 8 days, that only means it's 1 Nes. It's Mechayv 1 halal.
Say it's a bigger.
It's Mechan halal. Gidul HaNes means each additional day entirely transformed the extent of the Nes.
In the echos, not
If we don't indicate the number of yomim, but we just merely indicate that the Nes progressed and continued, we're back to Tosfos Kasha, that's not B'chayv, Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmai. Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmai means Einoi doime each yom of Chanukah than the yom before it, because the Nes was misgadol. Oy bazoi zok the goyin. In the fact that we have an indication of Yom HaNechnasim Yom HaYotzim, where did that come from? Yom HaNechnasim Yom HaYotzim came from because every yom is a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmai. If every yom is a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmai, it's not just a yom B'fnei Atzmai because the Nes continued. It's because it continued today 4 times, and the next day is because it continued 5 times. If we don't indicate the exact extent to which the Nes was misgadol, we are still missing in the Persumei Nisa of the Nes. And therefore we can suggest that Yishuv to the Stipler's Kasha, that in Doshtaten going in the same Loshen of the Gemara that says Kenegedayim Yom HaNechnasim or Yom HaYotzim, which Tosfos says means because each yom of Chanukah is a yom Tov B'fnei Atzmai, we also have to indicate the extent to which the Nes was misgadol. Otherwise, it's just longer, it's just more. So places that's missing the point. Longer and more is 1 yontif. Nisgadel is entirely different, and therefore we have a mechayiv to be to indicate the mispar of yomim, on each yom. That's what we want to suggest. Be'ez Hashem, to be miyashav the kasha of the stipler on the Bir Hagla.